Cruella Braverman, yes, that's her name, the Home Secretary of Great Britain, the Interior Secretary, a very powerful position indeed, was sacked for the second time from the same position within the last 12 months, and it was over Gaza. Cruella Braverman, to give her preferred moniker, was the one who said, indeed ordered the police to treat the wearing of a keffiyeh as a criminal offence. She told the police that she wanted the displaying of a Palestinian flag, not a Hamas flag, but a Palestinian flag, an internationally recognized flag, a flag that flies at the United Nations, a flag that adorns the British Foreign Office when a Palestinian leader comes to visit, that flag also was to be treated as a crime, as the emblem of hate. She said that the hundreds of thousands, perhaps 1 million on the last occasion, who were on the march for a ceasefire and an end to the siege in Gaza, were hate marchers. She may, however, have had a conflict of interest in the matter, as she unguardedly let go that not only was her husband an ardent Zionist, but that she had close family relatives fighting in the Israeli army in Gaza. Not the normal kind of CV that a person holding down one of the great offices of state in Britain has to bear. But the last straw for Cruella Braverman's very brief and inglorious stint in the British Home Office was when she accused the Metropolitan Police, the British police, London's police, of effectively being supporters of Hamas. They were, you see, according to Braverman, sympathetic to the hate marchers. They were not arresting enough keffiyeh wearers. They were not earnestly enough hunting down any Palestinian flags outside of the British Foreign Office. She wrote an op-ed, as the Americans call them, in the Times, the voice of the British establishment, in which she accused the Metropolitan Police of being lefties, of being left-wingers, sympathetic to left-wing demonstrators and antipathetic to those of her persuasion. Not that those of her persuasion can muster much in the way of numbers. Her dog whistle did bring a few hundred urinating, cigarette smoking, alcohol drinking, swaggering drunks of the British Football Lads Alliance down to the cenotaph, the epicenter in Whitehall, where British people traditionally mourn their dead and wish that there had been a ceasefire earlier in the conflicts in which they had fallen. The fascists aligned with the Football Hooligans Alliance turned out, I kid you not, like a pack of wild dogs at this hallowed place, and promptly began swapping punches with the Metropolitan Police, who they presumably believed were Hamas-supporting, PLO-loving, left-wing men and women in uniform. No Home Secretary could survive it. I knew immediately and called for her dismissal immediately that she had written this article, and so it came to pass. She's been sacked now for the second time, from Rishi Sunak's government this time. And who was the great beneficiary? Well, Britain's new Foreign Secretary is its old Prime Minister. Call me Dave, although you'll have to call him Lord Dave from now on, because he isn't even a member of the British Parliament, not even an unelected member of the British Parliament. He has not yet been placed in the House of Lords, whose attractions he has vigorously eschewed. Because, of course, if you're in the House of Lords, you've got to register your income and where it comes from. And people like David Cameron and Tony Blair, for that matter, are very not keen to do that. But David Cameron once had something very important to say about Gaza. In 2010, when he was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Let's hear it. It's very brief.
Let me also be clear that the situation in Gaza has to change. Humanitarian goods and people must flow in both directions. Gaza cannot and must not be allowed to remain a prison camp.
Cannot and must not be allowed to remain a prison camp. These are very important words. Cannot and must not be allowed to remain a prison camp. The largest open-air prison camp in the world, said the Prime Minister of Britain in 2010. And yet the government, which he now adorns, has continued to treat Gaza as no more and no less than a prison camp. It has been allowed to remain a prison camp, despite the then Prime Minister's powerful words back in 2010. So powerful, I picked them up and retailed them 1,000,000 times in speeches, articles, interviews, on television, in Parliament, on radio, on public platforms. I always quoted David Cameron describing Gaza as a prison camp. Now, a prison camp with 2.3 million people in it is a camp just waiting for somebody to break out of it, isn't it? And they would not be committing a crime by breaking out of it, would they? Because if it's a prison camp which has no legal validity, if the people in the prison camp have never been tried or convicted of anything, they have every right, don't they? 13 years later, and don't forget that he said, remain a prison camp, which lovers of the English language already know means it was already a prison camp in 2010 when the Prime Minister, David Cameron, made those remarks. But it has been allowed to remain a prison camp. And the people who broke out of it on the 7th of October not only were committing no crime in doing so, they had an internationally, legally enshrined right to resist those who had placed them for, in David Cameron reference again, decades. They had been illegitimately imprisoned in a prison camp. And so all these people who have mindlessly intoned since October 7th that Israel has a legal right to defend itself are factually, legally, completely wrong. The legal right belongs with the person in the prison camp to break out of it, to resist those who imprison him. It's they who have the legal right. Just like the Maquis in France were the people who had the legal right to fight back against their illegal military occupier. And the occupier had no legal right of self-defense whatsoever. Now, all of this is pedantry, really, because it's abundantly clear that there is nothing called legal rights in the world today. There is no law. There is no international law. There is no statute of war crimes. There is no statute of crimes against humanity. The Nuremberg Tribunal never happened. Or if it did, what it decided was not worth the paper that it was written on. It is abundantly clear that there is nothing called the International Criminal Court. For if there was, it would already be laying charges, not just against the people who have massacred more than 5,000 children, babies, sucklings, children dug out of their mother's womb as she lay dead, who never even got to suckle. If there were anything called crimes against humanity, war crimes, an international criminal court, these matters would already be before it. Neither is there anything called democracy. It's a shamocracy. You get arrested for wearing items of clothing that are here today, gone tomorrow. Home Secretary announces to be a crime. In Germany, it is now a crime to use the slogan, "Stop the genocide." I mean a crime. I mean a crime that you'll be arrested for, that you'll be jailed for. There's no such thing as democracy when both the government and the opposition have absolutely identical policies in Britain, in the United States, in Canada, in most of the NATO countries that are up to their knees in Palestinian blood over these last 5 or 6 weeks. That's not democracy. It's not democracy when 75% or more of your people have already said in opinion poll after poll they want a ceasefire, but only 59 Labour MPs and no Tory MPs can be found in Parliament this evening to vote for what 3/4 of the British public want. There's no free speech in this country when the only way you can appear in the mainstream media is to ritually denounce a political organization in Palestine about which you know it seems virtually nothing. I know everything about them. I was there when they were born. Guess who the midwife was? Israel was the midwife of the Hamas that you now can't go on TV unless you denounce as a terrorist organization. Even if your own family has just been buried under the rubble, even if 21 of your own family has just been murdered in Israeli airstrikes, you won't get past the first sentence in the British broadcast media unless you say, well, of course I denounce Hamas, not the people who murdered my 21 relatives yesterday. No. Kay Burley on Sky News interviewed a woman whose family had just been murdered in their own house. And her first question was, Israel is targeting this bombing, so why did they target your house? Well, anyone who isn't willfully eyeless in Gaza knows that they're not targeting anything or anyone at all. They are dropping the most horrifying ordnance on people trapped in a refugee camp, or in David Cameron's words, in a prison camp from which there is no escape, even into the waves, even into the sea. So there's no democracy, there's no freedom of speech, there's no international law. We are living in a time of monsters, and the monsters are us. The monsters are our leaders sitting in power in our countries, doing what they do on our dime, in our name, however many of us there are on the streets protesting against it. 10 Labour MPs were either sacked or resigned from Keir Starmer's front bench as he continued to insist that not enough Palestinian children have yet been killed to sate the satanic bloodlust of the war machine originating in Washington, echoing through its satraps in Western Europe, and being executed being the highly appropriate word, by the satrap in the Middle East called Israel. This state of affairs will presumably continue. Although President Macron broke ranks, called for a ceasefire, the next day he did an about turn and dedicated the rest of his life and all of his remaining ardor to the cause of Israel everlasting. Schulz in Germany has said that we're all lunatics, that Israel is waging war according to international law and all of the tenets of humanitarianism. Either these people do not watch what's actually happening down on the street in Gaza, in which case they are cowards, or they do watch it and they are still ready to support it in every way possible, by criminalizing their own populations, by sending weapons, sending warships, sending money, sending ammunition, or in the case of Britain, not even telling us what they are sending. Dozens and dozens of flights of military transport aircraft have flown from England to Tel Aviv, and the government refuses to tell its own people, even its own parliament, what or who is in those airplanes. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we have to face the facts. Contrary to what Joseph Borrell said, we are living in a jungle. This is now officially a jungle with no laws, no rules, no conventions, no constitutions, just a jungle where the beast, who for the moment has the sharpest teeth, is in charge of the jungle, and the devil can take the hindmost. You'll hear me talk quite a lot about Satan, whose existence in the world I believe to be self-evident, but it is nowhere more evident than the savage ravings of Western journalists and politicians. I'm not sure which deserves the greater contempt over this great war crime that we are watching. The Al-Shifa hospital, it turns out, according to Channel 13 television in Israel itself, has turned out to be a massive intelligence failure. Their words, not mine. I'd say it was the mother of all intelligence failures. Al-Shifa hospital had not a single armed man in it when the Israeli armed forces invaded a hospital. As they trod on the injured, as they trod on the wounded, as they trod on the refugees huddling for warmth and safety, as they trod on the dead bodies of the Palestinian doctors, nurses, and technicians that they had killed on their way in, having told us, and this green-lit, though he now denies it, by John Kirby, the White House spokesman, as they entered. What they said was, never forget what they said, that the Al-Shifa hospital was the command and control center of Hamas, that in its bunker were Israeli hostages, that armed gunmen ran the hospital, and that it was the epicenter of a series of tunnels. But tunnels, there were none. Command and control center, there was none. Hostages, there were none. Armed men, there were none. There were only dead bodies of patients, of children unplugged from incubators. There were only dead bodies. Do you get me? Only dead bodies in the Al-Shifa hospital. And that was the big lie on which they committed one of the worst war crimes, crimes against humanity, that the world has seen since the Second World War. I have no idea how long I've been speaking, but I hope I have conveyed to you the power with which I feel that the people of Gaza are in a desperate place, which may very well end up with them in Sinai, if not drowning in the sea. But we, in the Western world, are, if anything, in an even worse place than that. Imagine, we are in a place where everything that our fathers and grandfathers fought for, every freedom from fascism, from tyranny, that our people fought and died for, in our case in Britain, for a brief but glorious period, standing alone against fascism, Nazism, tyranny, the jackboot, we have gone quietly into that good night. This is the mother of all talk shows.